Welcome to the Bee's Knees, a podcast wild about native bees. Wild and native bees are under threat worldwide. In each episode, we look at actionable things we can do to support these adorable little guys, whose pollination work is crucial for maintaining biodiversity. I'm JC Meyer, and I thank you for being here. What comes to mind when you hear the word quarry? Perhaps, like me, you picture a scarred and desolate landscape, abandoned once every ounce of material value has been stripped away. But what if I told you these sites, often seen as symbols of destruction, could be unexpected havens for biodiversity and crucial to habitat conservation? Today I'm joined by Dr. Felix Kirsch, who explored nearly 20 quarries in southern Germany to uncover the fascinating interplay between wild bee communities, landscapes, and quarry ecosystems. So what inspired you to study wild bees in limestone quarries, and what makes these habitats unique for conservation efforts?
I think that's a relatively long story. At first, I was also just interested in wild bees, like you, maybe. And I wanted to learn about them. And then I was doing my master's studies. And there was a professor, and she was an expert on agroecology. Yeah, and she gave a lot of lectures on wild bees and honeybees in agricultural landscapes. And so I participated in her classes. When it was about time to select a subject, I asked her, what could I do? I really want to do something about bees. And she said to me, look, there is one old study from 1999 on bees in limestone quarries. And from this study, they produced a very impressive data set. And she really wanted to repeat that study to see whether the same species are still around and whether the population changed. So she asked me if I could do that. And I was very happy about the subject, so I accepted it. And so I ended up doing bees in quarry research. And what makes them unique? That was your second question. Yes. I think the most important aspect on the quarries is that they have a lot of open soil. So sparsely vegetated open soil. And this is a very important nesting resource. And the majority of bee species is, I'm sure you already discussed that in the podcast, soil nesting. So they really require that open soil patches, and we find them in quarries in large proportions. And also bees like slopey structures, for example, vertical cliffs and so on. And for sure you can find them. Another nice aspect is that very often if these slopey vertical structures are eastern or southward facing, then they have a nice warm microclimate. And this is also an aspect which a lot of bee species really like. Then we have these early successional stages, which are dominated by flower-rich pioneer vegetation. There we have, like, for example, Echium vulgare, blueweed, or hawkweeds, which the bees really like. And that's why I consider quarries to be very beneficial bee habitats.
So your study highlighted the importance of the habitat connectivity to the neighboring dry grasslands. Why is this connection important? And can you also just explain in general why connectivity matters for bee populations?
So I will start with the second question. So why is connectivity important in the first place? I read a study some months ago, and an author used a nice term referring to connectivity as some form of spatial insurance. So if we, for example, have an isolated bee population in an isolated habitat patch completely surrounded by the hostile agricultural matrix, and this population goes extinct, it's gone for good. Is that possible to say it like this? Gone for good? Okay. And so there's no possibility for the bees to recolonize because there are no neighboring patches where subpopulation of the same species are around. If we have nice or high value habitats which are close to each other, then it's possible that the bees are, or there's a constant exchange of bee individuals and species between the patches and a constant genetic exchange. And even if one population goes extinct, it's very likely that there is some form of recolonization going to be happening. And so I think this is the most important aspect of why this connectivity is important. And Also, bees are central place foragers, so they require a lot of different resources. For example, the nesting resources, the flowering resources in the surrounding of their nesting sites. This our quarries and our dry grasslands that we selected in our study, they have a lot in common. So they are both on the same soil substrate. So both are like limestone or chalky substrates. And so similar plant communities can establish. In the calcareous grassland, which is a very important habitat type in Europe, it's biodiversity hotspots of plant and animal biodiversity, I would say. They had very important but highly threatened because the traditional uses like land use activities they stopped. So usually in the past we had extensive grazing with sheep or goats there, or extensive mowing, but from a commercial point of view it's not so rewarding anymore, and that is why these traditional forms of management stopped or were heavily reduced, or they depend on subsidies. And that's why these habitat types, they are transformed into time by time due to the succession. They are turning into shrubland or even forests. And that's not nice because it results in a cooler microclimate, and the flower-rich habitat, the flower-rich vegetation is lost. Yeah, and in the quarries, probably, if we are lucky, similar plant communities can establish, and therefore they act as a form of refuge for the bee communities formerly widespread in the calcareous grassland patches.
Can you talk about how to improve or even provide floral diversity within these quarries?
I think one important aspect is that if you have this quarry and the chalky limestone soils, something similar to a calcareous grassland community can establish in the quarry, but not necessarily. So without intervention, you have something which is maybe quite close, but not as valuable. So therefore, you need some form of interventions, and that could be, for example, that you transfer mowing material from close by calcareous grassland patches to the sites, or even the seeds of this plant species which you desire to be there. But it's very important that you select native plant material from the surrounding habitat patches and not bring them from, I don't know, 200 kilometers away, to not support local animal farmers, for example, like smallholder shepherds and so on, which then need to move their sheep between the limestone quarries and the close by calcareous grassland patches, and by this also can transfer the seeds directly with their, if that's in their fur or on their hooves. Is that correct? Yes. So that they spread the seeds of the plants you really need. I mean, that's the traditional form of land use we want. So this migratory herding, which is not taking place so much anymore in nowadays.
So you mentioned earlier about shrubs, and they can be a problem. So you found that it does have a negative effect on the bee communities. Do you have recommendations on how to manage this issue?
So maybe at first I should or put some emphasis on the fact that for sure shrub is not always bad for bees. So especially in spring, we have flowering shrub, which is a nice foraging resource. And also some bee species are nesting in dead wood or in, I don't know, cavities in woody structures. So I don't want to say that shrubs are always bad, but later in the season when the flowering is over, and the canopy of the trees or the shrub is closed, then we have this effect. And I think I mentioned that before, that we have a cooler microclimate due to that. And also the flowering resources, which are sometimes in the spring forest very abundant, like the spring geophytes, they are gone. And so the bees won't find so much foraging resources anymore. And also due to the overgrowth with the woody vegetation, like the open soil is gone, which is required for nesting. So that's why I would say it's important to keep the shrub cover in the quarries at a moderate level. Completely erase everything, just look that there are still a sufficient amount of open habitat patches, which are then characterized as we want it here, like the open soil, is the warm microclimate, the slopy structures, they should not be overgrown by the shrub, and to ensure that they are really, that we have remaining like open, this nice open flower-rich structures. And this can be done again by grazing with sheep or goats. Goats are nice because they are also eating all the woody structures. But I also saw some quarries which were managed by cattle or horses. And what else can be done? Extensive mowing is a good idea. So maybe mow the site once or twice a year to get rid of the emerging shrub.
So you learned a lot doing this. Let's look at the bigger picture. How could your findings kind of maybe guide future conservation strategies for wild bees across Europe?
I hope that my research put some emphasis on the importance of the landscape context. I mean, I guess that policymakers in Europe are well aware that what really matters in biodiversity conservation is the landscape and how diverse it is. I think that the people are well aware of this, but I hope that my study puts more emphasis on that fact and also highlights the importance of calcareous grasslands as very important, crucial habitats which needs to be conserved and restored with these traditional management practices. And we have already the Natura 2000 network in Europe, which is also including calcareous grasslands as a habitat type of special interest. So people are aware of that. But I think the quarries and that they really can function as some kind of keys or stepstone habitat, which is connecting the remaining calcareous grassland patches. I think this is an aspect which is maybe not so well known, and I guess maybe some policymakers can also include or consider whether limestone quarries or quarries in general can serve as an important habitat to improve the connectivity at a landscape scale. I hope that policymakers think, okay, maybe we should not turn quarries which are not used anymore into forests or arable land or recreational areas for, I don't know, swimming. So leave it as it is with minimal interventions and let nature go, and then maybe put some local plant species you want to establish there. I think that would be nice.
So if you could encourage people to do just one thing to support native bees, what would it be?
I think one aspect which is very often forgotten is the open soil, which is so important for bees and for the majority of bee species. So I really would recommend people to take care in their gardens to have small patches of open soil, a sparsely vegetated soil, which can be used by the bees for nesting. I think that would be very helpful.
I have to say, I've gained a newfound appreciation for quarries. Many of them offer ideal nesting conditions for wild bees, and when paired with native, florally diverse grasslands, they create superb connectivity that supports thriving, abundant bee communities. A big thank you to Felix for shining a light on this often overlooked landscape and sharing his passion for wild bees with us. His actionable advice is simple yet impactful. Think about nesting sites. Bees need bare ground and loose soil to build their nests. And don't forget those sunny spots they love. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, let's let nature go.